A disappointing date with Dave. All this and more coming up on This Week in Retro.
High-resolution color graphics.
This land of high technology.
The revolution in technology that made the information age possible.
Those kids are not afraid of computers.
Reopening the Black Gate.
Artificial stupidity.
And turn off your computer before midnight.
All these stories and a whole lot more coming up on today's show. Up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.
Hello, Neil.
Hello, Dave. How are you?
I'm very well. Did you have a nice weekend?
I had a nice weekend. I'm going to get the first Ultima mention in. For people that are only listening, you're wearing your Ultima 6 t-shirt today.
Yes, 6. The False Prophet.
A good one. A good one.
Yes.
That was actually my entry into the series.
Yes. It's the one that we both had the same issue with. It's a fantastic game, but playing from multiple discs was torture.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
That's what I think sold the PC to both of us.
Yeah. Well, hold it all in, Dave. There's plenty of Ultima chat to be had later.
Yeah. How was your games that never were?
Oh, that was good. Games that weren't. Not games that never were. The games that weren't.com. Frank came and gave a wonderful talk at the Cave this weekend about games that never were. So unreleased, unfinished, abandoned games, as well as his journey through 25 years he's been doing this for, collecting stories, collecting information, archiving information, and hunting and unearthing those games that he always wanted to see. You know, you see previews in magazines and then the game never materializes. Well, his addiction, he kind of got hooked on that whole unearthing those games that were never released, and gets a huge buzz from actually being the first to play them. And what was a really nice thing was Dan, who runs the museum for me, was a playtester at Microprose, and he turned up on the day with a game that nobody's played for 30 years because he had a copy of a Super Nintendo game. And I think I'm going to make a video on it. So I won't give away any spoilers. But
Super Mario World.
Wasn't Super Mario World, Dave. Good guess. And we had to play it on a floppy disk and a super wildcard, piracy device to actually play it. So I'll make a video on that soon and, see if we can archive that off to Frank and the games that weren't as well. So that was a really good day. And then after this, I'll be preparing to interview Wild Bill Steely, one of the co-founders of Microprose.
Yeah.
Former test pilot.
Yeah.
All of that.
He'll be interesting. He'll really be interesting. I've got those
pre-interview nerves, where I haven't started preparing, so I feel unprepared, and I'm going to meet one of my heroes, and I've got to be prepared. So I'll really focus in on that.
Have I seen him on Computer Chronicles? That kind of thing.
Oh, yes, yeah, back in the day. Yeah, there is a clip of him. I think he's even got his flight jacket on.
Yeah.
Flight things. Yeah. So that's good. How's your week been?
I have been diving into Rose-Tinted Spectrum Series 3 of Games Master. Now, I bounced off Games Master back in the day. I was a little bit too old for it. I felt it was targeting younger kids.
Are we on the series yet with Dexter?
Yes, we are. We're on the series with Derek. So I've been watching that, and it is really eye-opening. I'm learning lots from it, and there's no way I would ever watch the series. I need to watch Rosie's review of the series, because that's condensed down, plus his humour on top. But it's absolutely amazing how bad it was. Dexter Fletcher is absolutely repellent as a personality on it. I'm not saying that's what he's like in real life, but the personality he's putting on there. Dave Perry looked normal.
Okay.
Dave Games Animal Perry looked normal on it. But it's such a badly done series. I mean,
the thing is, when you're making a series on the TV about video games, you can't just point the camera at a screen and go, here's a video game. And all of these programs were built around the personalities, weren't they?
Mate. It's so lads, though. It's absolutely toxic. But one thing I did notice, this series would be 1994, I believe, towards the end of 1994. PC gaming doesn't, or 1993, I think, 1993. PC gaming doesn't exist according to them. There's nothing about PC gaming. And in the first series, I think they mentioned the Amiga a little bit, but now it's just consoles, 100% consoles. Their game of the year, they didn't even mention Doom. Just
wow.
The PC gaming does not exist for Games Master. It's just consoles, just this myopic view of consoles. Not that there wasn't lots going on with consoles, there was plenty going on. But it's been a real eye-opener watching that. I'll put a link in the show notes.
Can you remember when Bad Influence started? Was that 93?
I think that was before. Was that before?
I'm going to have a little look.
Because I know that they said for Games Master they thought there wasn't an audience for it. And they kept pushing back. They wanted to make it more adult, and they kept pushing back against it.
92 to 96 was Bad Influence. So there was, crossover there as well. So competition.
Yeah, really interesting. That's what I've been doing, though. Lots of YouTube watching.
Fantastic. Right. Well, all the links about that will be in the show notes, as well as everything else that we're about to discuss today, including a disappointing date with Dave. Get the cologne on. We're ready for that. That's story 3. Should we go into our first story, Dave?
Yes, we should.
Let's go.
Although Neil and I like to bring up Ultima, we don't actually cover it very much on the show, and it's a shame because it's undeniably the root of all modern RPGs, be they classic, action, or JRPG, and that's true. So today I'm going to do a 2-in-1, a double pack of Ultima stories, a perfect pair. Are you excited, Neil?
Oh, don't threaten me with a good time, Dave. Although I will say you'll probably have someone in the comments shouting wizardry. So maybe hand in hand in the origins of modern RPGs.
I shouldn't include it. Wizardry probably has more to do with modern JRPGs than Ultima does, but Ultima has something to do with it.
Yeah.
The first Ultima game to be a PC exclusive. All the other games came out on multiple platforms. The first PC exclusive was Ultima 7, The Black Gate, and it's the one that you and I were dying to play when we got our PCs.
Even before, it was one of the reasons to buy a PC for me. Yeah.
And it's seen as the peak of the franchise. Ultima started with very, very simple interactions, and by the time Ultima 7 came around, you could have keyword conversations with characters, you'd unlock other keywords to speak to other characters based on your progress in the game. There was masses and masses of text in the game, maybe up to the levels of interactive fiction. And as you progressed around, you'd be collecting plot-important items. So it really had evolved a huge amount from 1981 to 1992 when this came out. And in some ways, you could say it was an RPG combined with a point-and-click adventure.
Just trying to remember, Dave, with Ultima 6, there was a lot of typing. You were typing your chats, you were typing your responses. Yes. With Ultima 7, there was lots of text, but you could click on keywords, couldn't you, rather than have to type everything out?
It was 100% mouse. There was keystrokes, but you used the mouse for everything. Used the mouse for moving. Used the mouse to select things. There were keyboard shortcuts, but it was a mouse-based game, which for the first time.
And at the time, it felt like a great jump to me. It was like, okay, great, this is the way to go. But actually, looking back, I quite like that typing element of 6. Yes. It feels a bit more involved, a bit more like you're unraveling and discovering the story, rather than just clicking on keywords. But, it was the way it had to go.
It ended up with a game loop where you would speak to someone and you would just click through all the options and exhaust the dialogue. And it still went on. I mean, that's how Morrowind did it. Morrowind had the keywords that you would click as well. PC gaming, that was still an early period for PC gaming, really, 1992. PC gaming had been going on for a good 10 years, but it was only really at the end of the 80s, the very end of the 80s, that it became popular when you had the 286, the EGA and AdLib combination before it really hit its stride with the 386, Sound Blaster and VGA combination.
Yeah, I think that's when it became a case of I'm going to buy a PC to play games with rather than I've got a PC and it just so happens it can play games. Yeah,
that's exactly right. That's exactly the case. The 286 might have persuaded some people if you were into strategy and RPG games. Then the 386 might have persuaded a few more. And then the 486 and Super VGA, more people yet. Even the Ultima 7 box, in fact, says 386 power on it. It says 386 power.
386 power.
Yeah, designed for today's 386 plus computers with 2 megabytes of RAM. And even then, the 486 had been out for a few years. It had been out since 1989 by then, but it was so expensive that mostly people were buying 386s.
And importantly, it was a hard drive only game.
Oh, yeah,
whereas
definitely.
Before you could play the games off a floppy.
Yeah. Ultima 7, though, was a speed-sensitive game. That's not a good thing. There was lots of them around in the early 90s that wouldn't run properly on faster PCs, which isn't ideal. But that was solved in the early 2000s with a program called Exalt, which is a modern engine for Ultima 7. And I say modern, but the first release of it was in the year 2000, 25 years ago.
Wow. Yeah, there were ways around it with programs like MoSlow to slow it down, sort of memory resident programs, which were effectively hammering the CPU to slow it down. But that if we want to play it natively on modern platforms, that's just not going to happen without either emulation, so you're not running it natively in that case, or a replacement engine, which is exactly what Exalt is giving it us, and it did that excellently.
And the funny thing is, there isn't really a speed that Ultima 7 should run at, because it was dependent on whatever it was running on. It was the same with XCOM, Enemy Unknown. The animations ran faster depending on the speed of your system, and there wasn't a kind of, this is 100%. Nobody knew what that was. And
it's also not, Ultima 7 doesn't have turn-based combat. No. So if it's running too fast, it's running too fast. You're just going to get mullered. It doesn't wait for you to make your move. And then
the avatar flies about the screen. The reason I mention Ultima 7 today is thanks to Indigo Prime, who submitted an article on Ultima 7 Revisited. Neil, you actually covered this a couple of years ago, but it is progressing. It's a new engine for Ultima 7. So instead of Ultima 7 was very strictly a 2D game, but it was presented in that 2.5D isometric thing with tiles that overlapped each other to give you the impression of it. But this new engine is fully 3D, meaning you can tilt and rotate and still see things, which really helps in Ultima 7 because there was a lot of obstruction of your view. It's now at version 0.1, which is a big landmark, and especially 25 years after the Exalt engine, we've got this new landmark. So it's not playable, but you can see things in it. There's gameplay is the next thing to add to it, funny enough. The most important part is to be added now. Now, my hope is this engine ends up with Ultima 7 being improved. I always felt the map was quite small and condensed with you bumping into things by accident. But back in 1992, it was amazing to get it at all.
I think it felt big enough to feel like you'd gone on an adventure, but small enough not to be overwhelmed. I think that's a weapon. And I also liked the way that the scenery changed as you traveled around the map. So it felt like you'd gone to a desert or you'd gone to a haunted island or something other than just the same repeating tile set. So that mixed it up. And of course, you had your cloth map or your paper map if you got the budget version up on the wall. So that really tied it all together beautifully. And learning the language, you had to be able to decode the runes, to read the place names on the map. There was all of those elements came into it.
All those little things to help the imagination gap, just to immerse you in it. There we go.
Oh, they've holding the map upside down.
There is Britannia. Am I holding it upside down? Yes. That's more Ultima 7 Part 2.
Lovely tea towel.
Yeah, lovely tea towel. That's what it is. It's a tea towel. It's literally a tea towel. They must have got it made by the same people that make tea towels of all the birds of the area you've just been or whatever. It was such an exploration, and of course, it's what led to things like Skyrim and so on, and these massive worlds you can get lost in. But today's main Ultima course is from a much earlier incarnation, Ultima 3 Exodus. Now, this wasn't a PC exclusive. Back in 1983, of course, there was a much broader range of systems, and in fact, it didn't even launch on the PC in 1983. It came later. And as the 80s progressed, more systems appeared. So it was released on the Amiga, Apple II, Atari 8-bit, Atari ST, the Commodore 64, DOS, FM7, the Mac, the MSX, the NES, the PC-88, the PC-98, and the Sharp X1.
Always surprises me how popular the series was in Japan. Always seems to get ports over there, which is interesting.
And it's what kickstarted their JRPGs. Now, you notice, of course, Neil, that there's a whole group of systems missing. It didn't get a port to the BBC Micro, the Spectrum, the Electron, the CPC.
Yeah, all capable.
Yeah, all capable of doing it, and it didn't get it, especially from a company with a guy called Lord British in it. You'd think he would think about those ones. I don't know. I guess it shows maybe the RPGs didn't come to the UK until a little bit later.
So it was perhaps too much effort for the likes of US Gold to do a quick cash grab with it. They were after easy conversions. Shame.
But if they're coding it for the MSX, then surely.
Yeah.
There's one that you wouldn't think would be capable of it, and that is the humble Commodore, cheap as moss chips, 1980 micro, the VIC-20. And thanks to R for submitting this. It's a work in progress video of Ultima 3 running on a VIC-20, and it already mostly works. There's still lots to do, but you can see he's got the hard bits done, and you can move around and interact, and there's somehow been music added, which shouldn't be possible, but it turns out he's using the CPU, he's hammering the CPU to get the music out, using 60% of the CPU cycles to get this music, which sounds like someone's doing tricks in a Spectrum, that kind of thing. And he's lowered the CPU need to compensate for this by using character mode for the game rather than anything else. So it's an innovative solution like that gets micros doing things they shouldn't be able to do. So you will eventually be able to play Ultima 3 on a VIC-20. I would suggest the Atari ST is a good place to play it. It's how I played it there. I'm sure the Amiga version will be good as well, and possibly the Mac, and maybe the Japanese ones, but the DOS isn't quite so good.
Fantastic that the VIC-20 is getting it. I was just doing a quick search there for BBC Micro and Ultima, and there was a guy. He's got a little blog there with some screenshots where he actually ported most of Ultima 3, I think it is, over to his BBC Micro in the early 1990s, but never quite finished it. But there's some fun screenshots of it, which is nice to see. In terms of the 3D project, the 3D conversion, I loved it from the moment that I saw it, mainly because Ultima, I felt, went to 3D before it was ready to go to 3D. So Ultima 7, as we said, was sort of peak isometric Ultima game, great pixel art. Ultima 8 was 2D, but it was more zoomed in and it was more action-oriented. Didn't really work.
It was Ultima 8 was 3D rendered 2D.
Yeah, pre-rendered.
That pre-rendered thing that I don't think's aged well at all.
Happened with a lot of games in that period, and sort of a pre-rendered 3D sprite never quite sat properly on the background. It always felt like it was floating a bit. I always had that odd feeling with it. Unless it was done really, really well, like Donkey Kong Country is a good example of it done well. Ultima 8 was 2D. Ultima 9 then went full 3D, and you had that crossover with Ultima 9 and Ultima Online, which remained isometric because that was all about massively being multiplayer.
Ultima Underworld, of course.
That was sort of a side Ultima, wasn't it?
It was.
Thing. So Ultima 9, full 3D and third person as well. Ultima Underworld was FPS and 2.5D Doom style pseudo.
Rather than 2.5D isometric. Totally different things.
Exactly. 3D effects support on Ultima 9. So in theory, it could have been great, but it just lost a lot, I felt. Ignoring that it was a buggy mess that was released too early because of pressure from EA. My main gripe was that the world was carved up into kind of chunks. So technically, I guess it was fully open world, but you'd go to, for example, Buccaneer's Den, an island, and it would kind of load you in there, and then you'd be stuck there until you'd done the objectives, and then you'd be loaded back to the mainland. So it didn't feel properly like you could just explore the open world like the ones before it, Dave.
Yeah, I love an open world in an RPG where it's done cleverly. For example, Fallout 4 does it really well. It has this kind of heat map of if you go the way the game kind of prods you to go, the difficulty will slowly creep up. But if you go away from that, which you're free to do, you will quickly get into really more dangerous areas. And it's up to you to decide if you want to do that or not. And I like that about games like Ultima 6 and 7, where you can stray from the path the game is guiding you to do, and it's entirely up to you. What I didn't like was when games like Oblivion, for example, decided that wherever you go, it will be your level. And then you're not really straying from the path. You lose the open world part of that.
And with those earlier Ultimas, you knew you could do that, but you knew you were setting yourself up for punishment. You knew you'd be missing clues. You knew you'd be missing out on the story. And great, it's fun to go hunting or exploring, but you'd always keep that load point to jump back to and go, right, back on the thread of the story. Let's get back into it. Ultima 9 didn't really feel properly open world. I felt the series should have always retained that charm of the isometric view with subtle 3D additions, being able to zoom in, being able to rotate, a bit like how SimCity 2000 went from isometric to isometric 3D, and you could zoom in and zoom out and spin around. I would like to have seen that with Ultima, but I get why they didn't do it. Everything in the late 90s had to be 3D. That was the pressure was on to do it. That being said, there were games like Baldur's Gate. There were games like Commandos, Behind Enemy Lines, not an RPG, but these were games that showed it was possible to have hit isometric style games of the period. But Ultima also carried a sense of pride with it with each release, that it wanted to be on the cutting edge of technology.
Yeah. It's difficult. You need to be told that now, because you wouldn't know if you look back, because how do you know what the cutting edge was? But yeah, Ultima was really pushing at the boundaries of what you could do with a game. Ultima 7, that was why it blew so many people away, because this wonderfully colourful world that you were immersed in. And although it was tiles, because of the way the tiles were done, because they overlapped, it did feel like 3D.
Yeah. So Ultima Online was then pushing boundaries in a different way. Ultima 9, it was trying to push too hard too early, really. So, so this particular project brings Ultima 7 back into the charming isometric 3D view that I always wanted, that ticks all of my boxes. And I know that the devs have had to overcome all kinds of challenges just getting it to this point, such as they jumped from trying to make the furniture sprites to actually designing all the furniture in 3D, tile mapped with textures because you've got to use the original assets from the original game, haven't you? So texture mapped with those original, so they look like sprites, but they actually spin properly. Being able to go into dungeons and rotate the view in dungeons and see from an angle that you wouldn't have originally been able to see from, and making sure the dungeons hiding the parts that you shouldn't be able to see until you should be able to see them. All of that trickery has been very hard for the devs.
Dungeons are not the strong point of Ultima 7. Things didn't go so well for that.
Yeah. So, I would say everybody go and support this project. Please do. As well as Exalt. Yeah.
So thanks to Alexei Eben for bringing Ultima 3 to the masses of people on their VIC-20s. I'm sure lots of people never upgraded from the VIC-20. They've been waiting for it for years. And thanks to Anthony Salter for bringing Ultima 7 to us in 3D. I will try and keep you up to date with these projects as they reach completion. We are sponsored this week by Pixel Addict magazine, Britain's favourite classic computing magazine. And it's time for a new issue, Neil. What's on the front cover?
It is. It's all about video pinball, the history of video pinball. And it's got a lovely Matrix-style video display at the top where they've got the Pixel Addict title. I like what they've done with that.
Can you make out what's on the ball?
That's is that Pinball Dreams or Fantasies?
Yes. It's one, or Illusions. It's one of the tables from that. That one. So that's the main thing. They're talking about Pinball Dreams, Night Mission Pinball, Full Tilt. Amazing games. There's also talking about Hit It With a Hammer, about 1980s text adventure games to a multiplayer group. I haven't read that yet. It's not out yet, so I haven't read it. I'm interested in that. And there's a special feature on the Spectrum, following up on the Rubber Keyed Wonder.
There's a special feature on Dizzy.
And they've got I've got an interview with someone who I've been seeing a lot of in the past few days, watching Games Master Series 3, Julian Jazz Rignall.
Yeah, and that's to tie in with his latest book, The Games of a Lifetime. So he's got a new book out, so he's doing the rounds. He has said that he would do a talk at the Cave one day. Bit tricky, though, because I think he lives in California. So if he's ever in the country, he said he would. I'm sure lots of people would love to meet him. But until then, the next best thing is to buy Pixel Addict magazine and read his interview.
Pixel.addict.media. Go and buy yourself. Get a physical copy. That's the best. Hold it in your hand.
$6.99. What a bargain, Dave.
I know. Especially these days with everything going up in price, Neil. Thank you for sponsoring us. What we're not sponsored by, though, Neil, is your bundle. That's right. Not an official sponsorship. How's it doing, though?
It's doing very well. £23,292 as we speak.
It is a bargain. It really is worth the money.
Go to rmcretro.store and buy the Museum Support Digital Bundle, because it will be unavailable in less than a week from the time you hear this. So last call to go and buy that digital bundle. Okay, let's get back on track. My story. Video game preservation is always a hot topic here, as well as the preservation of everything that surrounds the industry. You might have caught my recent episode about Amiga Format magazine, my fondness for it, and my desire to preserve those magazines for all to enjoy. And that was very well received.
By everybody.
Nearly, apart from by the chap who left a comment about me fetishizing them. Stop fetishizing the magazines, Neil, with your black gloves, and how I should not treat them like 17th century teapots, he said. But how else did those 17th century teapots survive until 2025 unless they were handled with care? So I make no apologies for fetishizing.
These things do matter. They're such an important memory to us. And if you can make an argument for things not mattering, it's nonsense.
Yeah. Anyway.
Nonsense.
I will fetishize all I like, thank you, especially when it comes to Amiga format. But vintage video gaming traditionally comes in two flavors. But Phil Spencer of Microsoft is not of... wasn't there a Phil Spencer, a TV presenter? I'm
thinking Warren Spector from Ultima.
No, I'm thinking Phil and the lady who'd go around like selling properties or trying to buy up properties. Do you know the one I mean?
No.
I'm going to look it up. Hang on. Going way off track. Yeah, he's called Phil Spencer from the show Location. Well, he hasn't been speaking about vintage gaming, but Phil Spencer at Microsoft has been.
How do you know it's not the same person?
Because it's Phil Spencer at Microsoft.
But what if Phil Spencer at Microsoft also does location?
Could be the same guy. You never know. With Kirsty, Phil and Kirsty.
Really?
Well, we'll leave that out there. Leave that like a bad smell floating around. You can play old games in their original form, whether that be through emulation or on original hardware. We play old games that are remastered for modern formats, perhaps using upgraded resolutions, graphics, gameplay mechanics to give us an authentic feel with modern luxuries. New engines that use the old games, like the Ultima ones we were talking about. Well, when Phil's not filming location, he's talking about how we could play old games in future, which have been recreated by, you ready? AI. Actually, can I have some reverb, Duncan? AI! So this centers around Microsoft's generative AI model, which stemmed from what its research called WAM, or World and Human Action Model. What came first, the acronym or the words? I don't know. Or George Michael. Anyway, they call this system Muse, not to be confused with iMuse. What was that? What was iMuse on? Was that LucasArts?
LucasArts.
Yeah, not to be confused with that. The idea being that the system can generate game visuals and action. It can help to make video games more compelling by overcoming the massive amount of people power that's needed to create living, breathing worlds in modern video games. People do the basics and AI can do the rest. The tech is trained through analyzing existing games and controller inputs too by players. Microsoft boasts that it's been trained on more than 7 years of continuous human gameplay. So I think that's it, just watching you playing Civilization, Dave, for 7 years. That's what it's trained itself on.
I was addicted to Civilization. I'm going cold turkey after Civilization 5. I haven't touched it. The only thing I've gone back to is Alpha Centauri, which I think might be a better game than Civilization.
Well, this is very exciting, I think, for future gaming. Not only do we get more complex worlds with AI's help, we'll also be able to let AI play the game according to this and just sit back and have a nap while it plays it for us. So that's wonderful. But Phil Spencer of Location also suggests that this technology could be applied to vintage gaming. In the article, Phil says, you could imagine a world where the gameplay data and video that a model could learn old games from and really make them portable to any platform where these models could run. He goes on to say, we've talked about game preservation as an activity for us, and these models and their ability to learn completely how a game plays without the necessity of the original game running on the original hardware opens up a ton of opportunity. Might have some more reverb on that, Duncan. Opportunity! Yeah, they want to monetize vintage games, don't they? Yeah, that's what they're talking about. So what would the result of this be for retro games? Well, the author of this article, Luke Plunkett, is certainly not impressed. He describes it as a Frankenstein's monster of AI-generated slop, guessing and filling in holes to try and run a game without its original engine. He says this is not games preservation, and frankly, I'm astonished to see such an important figure in the video games industry going on record and saying this when he's not filming location. What do we think, Dave? Can AI watching a vintage video game actually capture it and make it playable with enough accuracy that we could class it as preservation? Could a pixel-perfect platformer feel the same? Could AI capture the essence of a game like Prince of Persia, let alone something more complex like Ultima 7? Could Ultima Revisited be created at the press of a button, saving those devs years' worth of work? Dave, I did have some popcorn ready for your answer, but my bowl is empty because I ate it all. So that sort of gag hasn't worked because I was too greedy. But yeah, go ahead. Unleash hell.
Wham! I don't agree with those bad boys. I think it's just careless whispers.
Oh, dear.
I get that AI can be a ray of sunshine for programming and development, but I agree with the slop comment. The fundamental problem with AI creating things is it's inward looking. It takes the sum of all the stuff it's been fed and it finds things within those boundaries. It doesn't seem to stray outside. So what you get is not necessarily as creative as what we had in the 80s and 90s, where people got some really wild stuff out there. Now, of course, it wasn't always good. And in fact, the wild stuff in the 80s and 90s was mostly not very good, but you still did get the wildly creative stuff, like Lemmings, for example, from nothing, some wild idea that someone had, and that's the creativity that we need. So I don't think this is a good idea. I don't like the idea of feeding it Xenon 2 and saying, right, now make a modern Xenon 2 from it. It doesn't do it.
That's not the best example, Dave, because it could it do worse?
Xenon, yeah, okay, the height. So feeding it, I don't know. What's a really, really good game? Super Mario
Robotron.
On the Nintendo.
Okay.
Robotron. Yeah,
okay.
That kind of thing. We get the point. What I fear the AI would be doing would be taking the output of the game and just post-processing it to look like the post-processing in a modern TV that we don't want. I don't want that. But let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. AI can help. We've got a project we've just talked about, the Ultima 7 in 3D, and there's lots of work that needs to be done with all the different items in the game to turn them into 3D. That's the kind of thing where you would want an AI helper. You would be able to say to the AI helper, hopefully, take all these objects and make them into 3D, please. And it goes away and does that.
I've always liked the idea of them using AI, for example, for NPCs to say, okay, these are the things that you have to deliver to progress the plot. But aside from that, you're a baker in this world.
Yeah.
Fill the gaps, tell the story, say something different every time and interesting to mix it up. That works well, I think.
Yeah. Where's the harm in having AI with the source code and asking for it to help resolve bugs and glitches? Asking it why, when we do this, does that flash up on the screen? Or asking it to duplicate the features we've done already. I mean, we've seen how well Photoshop can and can't fill in gaps and things. And
it doesn't have to be all-encompassing. I've got a friend who I've been working on a project with recently, and he's used AI, so he's written all his source code. He's rubbish at commenting his code. So he said to AI, comment all my code. And then all of a sudden, all of his code is explained. It's picked it apart and said, well, this does this, this does this, this does this. And then that helps me to understand what's going on with the code. So it doesn't have to be AI everything. It can just be, you can pick and choose what you use it for. Yeah. For me, AI can and should be used as a tool of part of the development cycle. I think that's obvious. But the problem is people cut corners and just they use AI and say the AI output is the end result rather than using AI as a subordinate in a team. Instead of having a team of 8 people, you would say, okay, can you go and get the backgrounds done for Inside Caves, please? And you do the grass for me, please? You would just tell AI to do it, and then the result would come back. And just like you would do with your subordinates work, when you would check it, you would check what the AI did to see if it helped. So there's a huge range of stuff in retro. If we go back to 8 and 16-bit games,
for most 16-bit games, they have a look, and that is the look, and it doesn't matter what you're doing, that's how they look. They always look the same. But once you start to get to 3D games like Stunt Car Racer or Driller or Frontier or Doom, for example, then things are not equal. They can look different depending on how fast your CPU is, which angle you're looking at, and all the rest of it. So resolution can help, faster processing can help, unlocking frame rates. So that's why we have source ports of those types of 90s games, which give us the best way to play those. And I have no qualms at all about using AI as part of the process to do that. But just don't hand it something and say, right, make me the game again. We rip the soul out of it. So I don't agree with what they're saying. I'm not your man, and at my Club Tropicana, this is out.
Very good, very good. It's really difficult to say this will never work. You know, we know that technology doesn't work like that, because I could say, oh, this is a terrible idea, this will never work. And okay, maybe not tomorrow, but in 20 years' time, you might be able to say, right, show me Doom. I've heard about Doom. Show me that. And it just dynamically creates the game and shows it to you. Or show me Doom in the style of something else, and it just does that for you.
What if we took Turrican 2 and we said to AI, make the game a little bit easier? Because I would argue Turrican 2 is too hard.
Yeah,
I'm sure there's people who put lots of time in it and are really good at it. So, but you know, a guy that does that, he's absolutely amazing at it. But there's lots of games that are far too hard, so maybe AI could make them easier.
I want to play Turrican 2. This is in 30 years' time, by the way. But I'm trapped in a nursing home with Dave. Can you make it, you know, senior citizen friendly? And then you get the kind of Turrican 2 with a Zimmer frame, nice slow pace, and you can actually enjoy the game. Why not?
Turn-based.
Perhaps it could make... But then that's not preservation. Let's get back to he is claiming, when he's not filming location, he is claiming that this is video game preservation, and actually it's not.
Definitely not.
No,
definitely not. No.
That's a bit like me asking you to draw Picasso and saying, "There you go, I've preserved an original Picasso." It's not the same thing.
Yeah. Not preservation. Maybe there's room for it. Yeah, I think that's right.
He's a made man from north of the border. He's here to put your house in order. When it comes to news, you know's the chief, and the best thing about it is he keeps it brief. Ace is housekeeping. Dave is housekeeping. Dave is housekeeping. Dave is housekeeping.
Time now for housekeeping, which is the part when we normally say welcome to our new patrons. Do you know what, Dave? We haven't had a new patron for 2 weeks now. So
do people not love us?
Oh dear. Oh, look, Dave is very upset. If you'd like to prevent Dave from crying, if you'd like to make Dave feel special, go to patreon.com/thisweekinretro. Every little helps.
There is a post on the subreddit titled, "Has the legend of the Shane reached LGR now?"
Oh.
And it says, interesting to see the username Clint has chosen for his XP installation in his latest video on netbooks. The legend of Shane is spreading. Loved your appearance in the podcast too, Shane. Please come back again. So I asked Clint, I thought I'll ask him. I said, and he told me Shane was who I got it from, the previous owner of the netbook. Whether or not it was the Shane, well, that's up to you to decide.
We can't.
So let's assume it was.
Yeah, we can't rule it out. The Shane gets everywhere. I mean, he's such a prolific retro computer user. He's touched all of our hearts and all of our machines at some point, I think.
Text Adventures keep coming back, and there's been an interesting post there. In this week's show, 23 to 25, you mentioned how people were approaching Text Adventures like they were using ChatGPT. So pick up the log by the tree is the same as get branch. So this may open up Text Adventures to a whole new audience. But someone's replied and says, if you look around forums, the consensus around people still developing Text Adventures seems to be that LLMs, which I think is AI chatbot things, are ill-suited to text parsers, and that syntax tree parsers are still superior. So it goes on a bit as well. So turns out that's not such a good idea.
Computerist 1969 has also submitted a lovely picture of Well, it's an arcade machine. It's an Astro City arcade machine with a unit next to it, which is all built around the Zapparoo system. So there's obviously a mister inside this arcade and a really nice way of launching whatever arcade game core that you want, which is something we were talking about recently. So thank you to Computerist 1969 for responding to that conversation. I'll certainly look into that. And if that's something we can apply at the Arcade Archive.
There's more than arcade games. There's PlayStation stuff there in the form of cards, and there's little floppy disks. It's all miniaturized versions of the original media where possible. Neo Geo cartridges that are much smaller. It's really quite innovative. I think it's exactly what you were asking for, Neil.
We were playing with the Zapparoo this weekend, actually, on the Patron Day. So Richard's had the Multi-System 2 prototype out, fully working, running cores for everyone to try out. And he had mystery Zapparoo cards. So you would tap it and it would load a random game, a random mystery game, which was kind of a fun way of exploring games. Quite liked that.
I wonder if you get them themed, like load me up a shoot 'em up or load me up a platformer.
Well, you can tell it to load. This is not Multi-System 2 specific. This is just the Zapparoo. You can tell it to load just a core and then you choose the game, or you can tell it to load a specific game or a random game. So there's lots of flexibility with the system.
A really similar story to what we covered last week from Metro News, thanks to 42 Nobody 42. It's obviously hit a chord. It's the number one submission this week. It is 1 in 4 Gen Z, not Gen Z. Gen Z, as someone pointed in the comments, it shouldn't be Gen Z. But Gen Z, Brits own a retro gaming console, reveals a new survey. So 1 in 4 of the Zoomers has a retro gaming console.
You remember we discussed this last week, Dave?
Yeah.
Do you remember we discussed it last week? And I is this the same survey from Pringles, or is this a different survey?
Yes, this is the Metro covering it, but it's the top submission this week.
Okay, so see, that's getting some traction now. So other publications are picking up on that. And I'll just say what I said last week, which was, if you're going to do a survey on a Super Mario Brothers themed Pringles tube, you're probably going to get answers from people that own retro consoles. So I still don't believe that a quarter of all gamers own a retro console. I just don't. I
wonder what counts. I mean, because we know what a vintage console, we know what a retro console is. So the handheld things, like the Mayu Minis and so on, they're retro consoles.
Yeah, but you're suggesting a quarter of all modern gamers have an interest in playing old games. And when you think about how you were when you were younger, it was all about the next thing. It was all about the current gen and the next thing. Unless that the spread of gaming age is just spread out so much now that there's just, there are more older people gaming than younger people. I don't know.
But they wouldn't be Gen Z.
Only Pringles have the answer. Senior Buy 445 has submitted a picture titled "A Quiet This Week in Retro Inspired Sunday" and submitted a photo of an Atari 2600 joystick next to a Bombay Bad Boy pot noodle. Lovely. And if anyone else wants to send in their inspired photography or art, we can have a little gallery. Please send it in.
With the music from Tony Hart.
Yeah. No, you can't. It's copywritten. I've tried it before. YouTube will hit you with that one.
Go to AI and say, make me some music that is legally distinct from, but sounds like. An interesting read from the BBC submitted by Pixel Flight. Too many video games, too little time, but that could be changing. So it talks about how video games, how the appetite for longer games and so on is changing. A really interesting article.
Dimitri from Modern Vintage Gamer has reviewed the ITX Llama and says, finally, the modern DOS Windows 98 retro PC build I've always wanted. So go and check out his review.
Brassic Gamer has a screenshot, just a little clip of an installer, I think, which mentions the word Mastertronic back in 2005. So yes, they did keep going in a similar vein to how they did in the 80s and 90s, although I understand that's all going to change now.
Just as soon as we have some games, Dave. Yeah. We've got the name, we need some games.
Loads more in the subreddit. Go and knock yourself out. Have a read through the stuff. You're looking for something to do in a quiet 5 minutes.
And look out for my compilation of 20 new Mastertronic games generated on AI next week.
Slop. Are you scared, Neil?
Always.
Do you live in fear of technology?
Yes.
Are you worried that planes will drop out of the sky and your pacemaker will start rattling out a Rotterdam terror core beat?
Every day.
What if we turn the clock back a little over 25 years to the height of the panic about the Millennium Bug. And I expect our audience are informed enough to already know this, but it's fascinating because it's both a completely legitimate concern that would have caused untold chaos, but at the time, it was a complete anticlimax because nothing bad happened. We're talking about it today because Happy Coding ZX is linked to BBC archive clip on the Millennium Bug. It's from the lead up to it rather than afterwards, and the thing that struck me is that it's from 1997, which means that preparation was being done years before it, enough so that it was it had its head up above the parapet enough for BBC to notice and make a clip about it. And it does make sense, that, but I only really remember the coverage in the months up to the big event, or the big non-event. The bug is, of course, that if you hold the year only in the last two digits, when it gets to 99, it will roll over to 00, and then things will think it's 1900, not 2000. Now, it starts off by saying, certainly we know that there will be people who will die as a result of year 2000 computer problems.
Was this Lord Farquaad saying this?
No. No, you mean now. No. But no deaths have been attributed to it, so that was...
Bleep, please, Duncan.
They go on about air travel, life support, etc. It's a big scare piece, but it's strange because it might have been true, and they didn't know what was going to happen, but it might have been true. And if it wasn't for an army of COBOL and Fortran programmers coming out of retirement and filling up their pensions, then maybe it would have gone bad, but they did get everything updated in time. So it leaves us with this paradox where people think the Y2K bug was overstated and wasn't a problem and it was all made up. But they're wrong, because without people fixing it, there would have been problems. Now, the clip goes on, and you think you're watching the little news bits in RoboCop or Starship Troopers by how overstated they do it. And there's a high-pitched bleeping computer flashing error 2000. The clip goes on to layer it on really, really thick. And if you excuse my dad's army impression, we're doomed. There's a comment on the post from Urban Dragon which brings up something similar. The ozone layer. Back in the 90s, we had a real panic about the ozone layer, and it turns out things are fine. And you might be thinking, well, that was a load of nonsense. No, absolutely not. Because the world took urgent and drastic action. And just like the Y2K bug, it was fixed. And then afterwards, people thought, well, it was never a problem in the first place. Neil, were you involved in IT back then?
I was working for a housing association at the time in the IT department. I was supporting NT servers, Exchange, the network, the desktop users. And all of that side of stuff didn't really need anything specific that I can remember beyond just the usual vendor patches, which I would have installed anyway. And like you say, they were warned well in advance. They were prepped for it. So those just rolled out as normal. Where there was more of a concern, I remember, was on the systems that hosted that great big database of tenants and properties and all of that stuff. That was all based on a Unix based system. So, we were accessing that from Windows applications on the front end. And I can't tell you specifically what was done to make sure it was Y2K ready. Obviously, it was all around the date stuff that you mentioned. But most of that was all done by my boss at the time, a lady called Christine. And the only time I went near it was to swap out the backup tapes. So she had it covered. I don't think it was a custom-made database. I think it was off-the-shelf packages. So it would have been done with the support of the companies that made it, but no doubt quite a hefty, expensive maintenance contract to help sort that out. So that was fine. That passed without any problems. And on the whole, I think we were pretty confident that it would all be fine. And I saw the new year in somewhere in a pub in Surrey. So I was about 2 hours away from where I worked. So, I was confident enough to do that. With a man who was dressed as Doctor Who had made a full-size model of the TARDIS. So he was carrying that round the pub with him. Midnight struck, the lights didn't go out, we all did a shot of tequila, and life went on. That was the amount of the Y2K bug. I'm trying to think. I kind of felt a little bit disappointed that the lights didn't go out. I kind of had this sort of slight hope that there might be some drama around it. Not enough to kill anyone, just a bit of drama, but there wasn't even a flicker. We didn't even have a brownout or anything. There was media hype, of course, at the time, and it was a really good, easy, lazy story to run, wasn't it? They would focus on the consequences of what would happen if nothing was done, if no action was taken, even though action was being taken. And when I say hype, I mean 1999 hype. It was bearable. It was on the 6 o'clock news. It was fine. If it was covered today, I dread to think how it would be covered.
Oh,
but yeah. we could consume that level of hype without too much problem back then. The fact is, it was a problem that was identified. It's understandable how the problem got there in the first place. The problem was addressed, and that doesn't make for a good news story, but people understand that. And I don't think that the stories that did try to paint it as a great big drama, I don't think they stuck that much, at least not for me. I think most people could see beyond that, see it was in hand. But do you know a whole different problem, a different date for you, Dave, the Y2038 problem?
Yeah, I know what that is. It's a similar thing.
Similar thing. So this is when the time since the Unix epoch, the 0000, 1st of January 1970, that's when it starts from. When that gets to 2038, certain date and time in 2038, you will fill the limit of a signed 32-bit integer. You will hit the number limit. It will roll back around. That, of course, is solved if you're using 64-bit software with 64-bit integers. But there is no solution for embedded systems, for example, that are just using that 32-bit integer without breaking a whole lot of other stuff. You can't just fundamentally change the way C works, for example, and expect the code to accept it. So that's potentially more difficult to solve. It would be more a case of replacing rather than solving and fixing, I think. So there you go. Well, anyway, Dave, did you expect more fireworks to go off? How was it all for you?
Yeah, I thought things would go wrong. I felt the way they layered it on, some things must go wrong. Some companies wouldn't be prepared. Going back to what you said about those embedded systems, my experience with IT upgrades is you give people a deadline and they always need to go beyond that deadline. And I wonder what will happen in 2038 when they say, yeah, we need an extra 3 months. And they're like, you can't have 3 months. You can't have 3 months. You need to deploy these new systems. But they'll cope with it, or they'll suffer if they don't. And I just don't think it'll be a concentrated problem in a few places that's more severe, but it won't be as widespread as the potential for the Y2K thing would be. I want to mention one last thing on it, and it's that iconic sticker. Remember, turn your computer off before midnight on 12/31/99. It's an American one from Best Buy, which Duncan, I'm sure, will put on the screen. And I don't know if it's true or not, because it doesn't really make sense. I mean, what's going to happen if it's sitting on at that time? It's going to blow up? I don't know if it's made up. I don't know. Anyway, Y2K bug. There you go. Didn't turn out to be as bad because people put the work in.
Time now for our community question of the week. And last week's question was, what was your favourite method of cheating, in brackets, on games, not partners? And Duncan has put an answer in before we get to yours. He says, I remember typing in those small programs in Amstrad Action, which used to poke the memory and then load the game. And then I got a multi-face too. Yeah. Poking a different number to get more lives, to get more time to break the game. Always good fun. But, you've got to have a peek. You can't have a poke without a peek.
I don't remember peeking on the Amstrad CPC. I think that was the Spectrum thing.
Oh, a specky thing, was it? There must have been a peek command. If it might have been called something different on the Amstrad. Anyway, top answer comes from Happy Coding ZX. He says, as Tungsten Orchid says, so I think he's read an earlier answer. I think Pokes is the one. Get in the magazine and it telling you how to hack into games always felt especially good. In the case of the Spectrum, using the merge command instead of the load command would stop the auto run, allowing you to then add extra lines of code. Developers soon got wind of this, however, and made the computer crash if you used it. Magazines would then start printing custom loaders for games that you could type in, choosing the pokes you wanted to add. And those were my first steps into understanding machine code. And I bet some of the kids that did this went on to be part of the cracking scene. Nice.
Lord Borak says Kane on the Amstrad CPC. The last level, where you had to chase a train on a horse and jump over hedges, I had trouble timing the jump, so I had to pause the game and draw lines on the screen to help judge the jump. Is that cheating? Yes, it is. Of course, save spamming in games and riding around outside of the map, not engaging with a larger enemy force or Imperial glory, waiting for the map timer to run down.
Crest of Y2K says, I can't think of anything except for looking at the other player's part of the screen in multiplayer N64 games, Star Fox, GoldenEye, Mario Kart, etc. Yes, that is cheating. Looking at the screen, definitely cheating.
Weeping Scorpion says this combination of letters, which I think is imprinted in everyone's head, IDDQD. Of course, the famous Doom cheat.
It's not the question of the week without a crafty log, and he says, I would either use a walkthrough, or if it got really tough, I'd get someone else to do it for me.
I've heard of dads being asked to do a bit in a game, or older brothers to do a bit. Richard Shears mentions the action replay on the Amiga. He says he never got the Multiface 2 for his Amstrad, and I think some Generation Pixel pointed out our Spectrum bashing last week. And let's make it up for it by saying the original Multiface, of course, came on the Spectrum. So without the humble Spectrum, we'd never have got our Multiface 2 in the Amstrad.
And finally, I am Paul H. says, I would give my brother a dead arm if he was about to beat me at a game. Literal body blows. I was the little brother. I was on the receiving end of those. Not from Paul, but from my own brother. So, yeah. And there's an awful lot of answers in this question of the week, so please do go and have a browse through. Lots of lovely detailed answers.
Cheats.
Lots of ZX Spectrums, lots of cheats. All of you, filthy cheats. Time now for our question of the week for this week. And the question is, what vintage game are you asking AI to remake for you? And what are the most important aspects of that game that it must not miss to be a success? Have a good think about that, because there are so many nuances and things in games that add to the gameplay, define the game, and can AI actually pick up on that? So, yeah, interesting question. That will be pinned, as always, at reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro. And if you could do anything for the show this week, we would ask you to subscribe if you haven't already done so. And if you'd really like to support us and stop Dave from crying, go to patreon.com/ look at him, he's like a sad puppy, /thisweekinretro. And keep on doing what you're doing. Thank you so much for listening to us, for supporting us, and for getting us to show 209 next week. Fantastic. Anything to add, Dave?
Lord of the Rings, Game 1, Part 1, get AI to remake it so it doesn't give you an out-of-memory error. That's my request.
We'll have it for you this time next week. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye. He's waving. I'm waving too.
This Week in Retro was presented by Neil from the Retro Collective and Dave. It was produced by me, Duncan Styles. The podcast version of the show is available through your favourite podcaster, including Apple Podcast and Spotify. And the video version is available on the This Week in Retro YouTube channel.
Join our community subreddit at r/thisweekinretro to suggest and vote on the stories we cover on the show. If you watch This Week in Retro on YouTube, please give us a like and subscribe to help us reach new viewers.
If you enjoy our show and would like to support it, then please check out the link to our Patreon page in the show notes or description. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time for more up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.